I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to Conversations with Al McFarlane. Glad to be here and glad to have you along. Today is Thursday, July 28th, 2022. Thursday's cool day for me. I simply hang out with friends of mine. I call our group the Companions, and kind of open invitation, open architecture. Anybody who's available shows up, and we talk about things that are important to us in our personal lives, our community lives, our cultural lives, our spiritual lives, our national lives, whatever identity and community mean to us. I simply say, hey, sister, hey, brother, what's on your mind? What are you thinking about today? And so today, what I want to do is invite you who may be joining us by either Facebook or YouTube, if you're joining us by Twitter or LinkedIn. I'd love to have you be part of this companionship, be a friend. And I'm asking you, what's on your mind? What are you thinking about? What's important to you? So why companions? I've been talking about this series of books I've been reading. And I come to the series of books through being a member of a new online community called Narrative. I'm wearing the gear. Narrative is the word narrative with a K. And the easy way to remember it is like knowledge. Knowledge, you spell it with a K. Narrative, the same word, normally you spell with N, but with a K. The companion organization to that is called Nubia. Common sense says Nubia, but this is Nubia with a K as well. And these are kindred online communities being created by our people, for our people, to reflect our capacity and the need and the plausibility of us building a narrative and relationships, a system of governance between and among us that will move our people towards freedom. It's a community that invites us to always ask the question about anything. And the question we must always ask is, what does it mean to our freedom? Any discussion, any consideration beneath that has to come the question. And so what does this mean for our freedom, our liberation, our completion as an Africana community, as Black people? And so I've been through them involved in a series of wonderful explorations, adventures, learnings, knowledge acquisition, discovering what they have described and we are describing as an Africana way of knowing or of learning. The premise behind this, and let me say, first of all, thanks to Dr. Karen Hunter. She's an award-winning journalist and broadcast personality, blogger, personality, and award-winning educator teaching journalism at the university level, I think at Hunter College in New York. And her colleague, the on-camera colleague, Dr. Greg Carr, head of Africana Studies at the university, at Howard University, among other things. But Dr. Carr and Dr. Hunter, for about 120 weeks so far, so well into 2 years, have been having, at minimum, a weekly session of a conversation just like this. They call it In Class with Carr. And it happens every Saturday morning, I think at 8 o'clock Eastern Time or 9 o'clock Eastern Time. And they've built an audience of over 1,000, sometimes 2,000 people tuning in to hear what you might call a lecture, but it's bigger than, different from a lecture. It's a conversation between two people that know, and then they have it structured so people who are calling in can either add or raise questions or criticize, but there's engagement to those. What they did was discovered that the world was changing as a consequence of COVID-19. And as institutions and mobility and personal contact all sort of tamped down due to necessity, what did that mean for things like the university or public school? and they decided that they should have a learning environment, a learning experience where a professor like Professor Carr or like Professor Hunter could talk about what they knew, share information, do what teachers do. But it wouldn't be a class you have to pay for. It wouldn't be something that you get quote unquote credit for. It would be a chance for you to understand the power of your own mind, your own thinking, your ability to analyze the world, analyze the current context, and to map out both questions and answers that suit your experience and your expectations for yourself and for humanity. And so they allowed themselves to question what the real value, the real deliverable has been for education as we understood it, the ivory tower, the university, the campus, and all of the business behind that that is unseen, but is the driving force. And so they discovered that there is an energy and an interest in the community for knowledge acquisition, for knowledge sharing that does not depend on the institution, the ivory tower, to validate it, to provide it, but that between us and among us, using technology, we can create an exchange of knowledge, innovation, information that improves us the way education ought to. Education around learning, knowledge acquisition, and not so much around validation or approval or certification, which is what the institutions we call colleges and universities do. So they've been doing this. So as a consequence of tuning into that, I love the fact that every time Dr. Carr was on, he'd be sitting in a room like I'm in now. And he's sitting in a room that's like a cockpit in an airplane, it seemed to me. This is my visualization of his space environment. And he'd have a gazillion books all around him. He had to top to bottom of the room, books to the right, books to the left. He'd get up and make reference to a book and reach down and find the book and say, oh, here it is. Or he'd walk off camera for a second and come back with the book and say, this book is so-and-so. He'd turn to a page, well, it says on page 200, and he'd read something he'd underlined, and he'd be able to reference the conversation, whatever it was, with literature, with text, with examinations of the idea by scholars, by thinkers, by artists, by doers who documented what they have done in the form of books. So one of the people that was mentioned a few times that I've become sort of enamored with is the Ghanaian author Aikwe Arma. Aikwe Arma is a Ghanaian who, I'm looking at the back of this book of his, says the author from his first novel, The Beautiful Ones Are Not Yet Born, to his latest essays, Aikwe Arma has advocated a rebirth of African society inspired by ancient knowledge of our unity and an understanding of what we can achieve. Since 1980, Arma has lived and done his writing in Senegal, West Africa. And he writes through a publishing company called Per Ankh. And I don't know if you can see here, at the bottom of this is a symbol. And the symbol is in ancient Egyptian. It's hieroglyphic. The symbol means, Per Ankh means the house of life. Per, house, and Ankh, life. This is house of life. So they've created a company called Per Ankh Publishing, or House of Life. Per Ankh is an African publishing cooperative funded and managed by a worldwide group of friends who runs a workshop for beginning writers. That workshop is called Per Sesh, and it does that in the seaside village of Popenguine, I may be saying it wrong, Senegal. So I started grabbing all of the books by Aikwe Arma, and then you see the stack of books over here. I'm like ordering books all day, every day, because I'm so impressed and excited and motivated by what I see. This is the power of an image. I'm so impressed by what I see with Dr. Carr and with Karen. So, I love books. I've got libraries in my basement, libraries in my office upstairs, and let me bring a miniature representation of that to this setting that I'm in. And I love the way that Dr. Carr would always reach back and grab. So if I'm talking, I'll look and grab Metu Netter. I can reach back and grab something called The Voices of Harlem Renaissance or Osiris Rising, a book by Ikwe Irma. I have books that are published by Publishing that are translations of ancient writing in several languages. Let me show you what I mean. This is a book entitled On Love Sublime, right? And what I love about it is that it's a poem, a love story, but it's presented simultaneously in several languages. And so inspired by that, in the past couple of weeks, we launched in Insight News a recasting of what we'd done before called Afro-Descendientes. We're presenting stories being created by one of my editors who's in Colombia. He's back in Venezuela now, writing in Spanish. Another colleague who's in Bahia is translating those into Portuguese. I am translating them into English. And our intent, and I've made the contact, is to also translate those same stories into Yoruba, perhaps eventually Somali or French. What's the idea? Well, this is a model. And even though I read the English, I can read the Spanish. I have a feeling for the Portuguese and the French. I'm not competent in those, but all of it tells me that these things are accessible to me and that these languages, these idioms, are things that I can possess and walk in and live in and use to reflect my identity, my interest, my future. And my goal then, following the model of Per Ankh, is to be able to present stories in several languages side by side in Insight News. Well, I'll stop there. I'll go on and on. I'm glad to have this moment to speak with you. I see my colleague, Dr. Irma McClaurin is here, and my co-host, Brenda Lyle-Gray is here. Let me bring you guys in. And maybe, Vosh, you could bring up the current paper, the Insight News. I want to give kudos to my friend, Brenda Lyle-Gray, for an excellent piece she did based on the interview that she and I did. We flip to page 3. The interview was with the candidate for mayor of Brooklyn Center. Her name is April Graves, and Brenda just did a marvelous job in telling that story, bringing her story to life and sharing it. And hopefully, she'll have a successful campaign to be the first Black woman mayor of Brooklyn Center in the Twin Cities here. With that, hello guys, how are you? And welcome, and thank you for being here.
Hey Al, pleased to be here. I'm talking to you from Grinnell, Iowa, where I am actually here to be part of a planning committee for the 50th reunion anniversary of my class of 1973. Wow.
Oh boy.
Great.
So in 1969, Grinnell College, which has about 1,280 students, admitted its first critical mass of Black students. There were 18 of us. And as far as I can tell, 15 of us are still living. And so I'm representing. What can I say? I'm here to represent.
Amazing. So the town is Grinnell, right?
So Grinnell College was founded by J.B. Grinnell, who apparently saw a slave auction and was horrified and established this college, which has been admitting Black students, small numbers, since the 1800s. And it is a very elite college. It is the wealthiest college in the state of Iowa. It probably ranks up there in terms of its endowment with some of the big names that we know, namely because it had some really interesting people teaching here. One was Henry Noyes, who invented the Intel circuit chip, was a student who dropped out and then came back and then taught here and left them some Intel stock. Danforth, who was of the Danforth, what used to be called the Danforth Teaching Fellow, was a professor here, and apparently from the patents he made around paints and stuff, he created the endowment, the Danforth Teaching Fellowship, but also apparently only took $1 a year for his salary, or so the story goes. So it's got the founder of the Des Moines Register, I think it's Rosenwald, who founded the Des Moines Register. He had this really interesting friend named Warren Buffett who used to advise him about how to invest Brunel's endowment. What can I say?
Listen.
Money, money, money. Well, that's good. And the reputation of Brunel, there's some other schools in Iowa that have strong reputations as well, that Black young people went to. Do you know some of them?
Well, Brunel is part of what's called the Associated Colleges of the Midwest. And so you have, small colleges like Carleton and St. Olaf.
In Minnesota,
In Minnesota, you have McAllister, you have Cornell in Iowa, not in Ithaca, New York. And, you had Co-College. So these were all part of this consortium. And what they did was to share resources. And so I participated in an ACM program that took me to India in 1971-72. And so it's provided opportunities, but most of them outside of Oberlin, which has a historic reputation of actually admitting Black students early on. And that's where Coretta Scott King got her degree from. And so they have a much stronger, shall we say, trend of enrolling Black students in larger numbers than some of the other schools. But all of them, to some extent, had a population, small numbers, 3, 4, 5. And when the 60s came, they sort of participated in the desegregation. I would say the desegregation of colleges, white colleges, what we call predominantly white institutions, probably happened sometime in the mid 60s, the class of 60, people who were class of 69. So about 1960, 65, with the advent of the civil rights movement and the kind of attention that it was getting, a lot of these institutions opened their doors more widely. And what was interesting is that I was driven here from Des Moines, that's the closest airport, Des Moines, Iowa, and the person who drove me was talking about his experience as a townie, someone who grew up in Grinnell. And he said, imagine we are a white farming community and suddenly there are all these brown and Black people coming into the campus. He said it was a shock to us, to have them in town. I will also say that it was, from what I've been told, it was at that moment that we had a critical mass that the sheriff's department got riot rifles in their cars. And so a lot of changes and transitions, we were the catalysts, for that. And what I'm hoping is that, at least for my class, is that we commemorate the contributions that Black students gave in pushing these institutions to become more diverse and inclusive. That is not language that was used back then, but clearly we were pushing for access. We were pushing for the institutions to reflect our own history and culture. And a lot of the programs that are in place today, women's studies, LGBTQ studies, those programs would not exist were it not for the groundbreaking efforts of Black students, in which we actually wrote the curriculum. We used to joke and say, well, because white professors were not interested in even updating themselves and learning about this. And we used to joke and say, well, if we can write a curriculum for Afro-American studies, why can't they just give us a degree? And ironically, even though the African-American studies concentration at Grinnell was the first of sort of minority scholarship, it was the first to disappear. All the others have been endowed. So I understand that the college is now trying to make some form of reparations and is going to be reestablishing the Afro-American studies concentration, calling it Black and Diaspora Studies, and working on getting an endowed chair. Better late than never.
How does
And
these,
just one last
sure,
point is that
sure.
the oldest Black alumni is 170 years old, and they have been honoring her. And she actually grew up in Grinnell.
Wow.
How old is she?
107 years old. She passed her 107th birthday this I think this summer.
Amazing. So she's
Yes.
still there.
And
Great.
still lucid.
Phenomenal.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. Irma, whenever we talk, I love listening to you and talking with you. I've said to you in the past that when you and I are on the phone, we talk until I get a headache because you keep stacking and stacking and stacking and stacking and telling stories and reflecting how complicated the world is.
It is.
Complicated but manageable.
And
Complicated
I
but
wanted
doable.
to speak to your reference to, you called him, I call him Omar. I used to teach his course
Mhm.
because I took one of my teachers, and the person for whom I was the first research assistant was Chinua Achebe. And I took his African studies course in African literature course in probably 1974.
Mhm.
And I became Chinua Achebe's first research assistant. And so I remember Amar's book, The
Mhm.
Beautiful Ones Are Not Yet Born, teaching that, along with Ngugi, who also was one of Chinua Achebe's contemporaries. And when I think about this literature and what you were saying about the need for us to have multiple languages, one of the things that I did, because I could not speak another language, is that when my children started school, I made sure that they were enrolled in sort of the bilingual track.
Mhm.
So as you know, my daughter is an artist and performer, and Zaina sings in multiple languages. She sings in Portuguese, she sings in Spanish, she sings in Swahili, she sings in Bambara. She writes her music, her lyrics in English, and then she has friends who will translate
Mhm.
them into Bambara. And that fluidity, linguistic fluidity, is something that we really need to cultivate among our children.
Mhm.
And she has fantastic art. I
Yes.
want a copy. I've never seen art like that, Al. It's unbelievable. And I passed it on to a friend of mine, Anna Gallegos C. Reinhardt, who founded the Warehouse 21 Teen Art Center.
Okay.
And I was a board president, which was really kind of unusual in Santa Fe, being Black and a senior.
Yes.
But I have never seen art like that. It
Thank
is
you.
phenomenal. And everyone that I sent it to said, "Who is she? Can we get copies?" I never did get a response, but that's okay.
No. I will actually put you in touch. She does do Gleesy prints of some of those pieces, and so
Oh,
I
they're
will find out
beautiful.
from her.
I've
Yes.
never seen anything like it.
Yes.
It
Well,
is-
what
And
would
I
be-
would say her music is also as extraordinary. She plays the kora and the bass ukulele, and she has blended what she calls what is African classical string music. And for those of you who don't know the kora, it's like a gourd with a neck, and it's played like a harp. And she's blended that on her CD with Western classical music, string music. So it's an interesting synthesis of sound. Some of them are songs that she's done covers for. One is Afinyeye, which is a song from Kenya, and then others where she's written her lyrics herself and actually had people translate them into a different language.
Phenomenal. But Dr. Irma, that says a lot about you, because during those decades, for parents to have those types of expectations, putting our children in to different arenas where we were told you don't belong, while
Yes.
we didn't tell our children that. And I don't think Maxine McFarlane told her children that either.
And I remember very clearly, I can tell you the day that I sort of went on a rampage, and that was the day my daughter came home in tears because some of the kids called her Medusa. She was one of 2 or 3 Black kids in this elementary school
I went
because
through
I
that.
had cornrowed her hair. And I, at that point, went on a rampage. And I remember contacting relatives and saying, don't you ever send a blonde Barbie to this house again. It will go in the garbage.
Mhm.
Making sure that I had a subscription to Essence and to Ebony so that there would be things in the house. Because I think what we have done, and Al, this speaks to what you were talking about. We have abdicated a lot of responsibility for cultural heritage preservation and transmission to schools.
Yep.
But what we forget is that schools, at least once they became desegregated, were really not designed to perpetuate and transmit our cultural heritage. And
We
what we
talked
also
about that yesterday.
and also what we forget is that the desegregation of schools and the integration that occurred was an integration of students, not teachers. Black teachers and the talent that we had in Black teachers who gave us not only the reading, writing, and arithmetic, but also gave us access. I mean, I remember 8, 9, 10 years old, I was often asked to read poetry, and they were giving me the poems of Langston Hughes and Gwendolyn Brooks. So I was exposed to that early on. I didn't have to wait till the 60s. I memorized Paul Laurence Dunbar's poetry, not just his dialect, but his poetry written in standard English.
And we did too.
That was something that these teachers made sure that I had access to. So when the 60s and 70s come and we're talking about, Black studies and what we need, I began to recognize how rich, even though I grew up in an impoverished household, how rich my experience had been because I'd had that exposure. And I think that's what we need to get back to, is that Black families, Black communities, the organizations like the Phyllis Wheatley Center in Minneapolis, we need to get back to the business of transmitting the cultural heritage knowledge to our children and not assume that it is the responsibility of schools only.
Well, it's also like the Hallie Q. Brown Center in St. Paul, and that's
Yes.
a great segue to bring in our friend, Jonathan Palmer. Jonathan, how you doing, buddy?
I am doing good. Great to see everybody.
Good
I
to see
love
you.
the artwork, Dr. Irma.
Thank you.
You know what, Irma, if you got some of your daughter's art on your computer, maybe you can screen share.
Let me just see,
If you do,
okay?
and then because Brenda certainly gave it
Oh.
a high recommendation, right?
I mean, it was just absolutely phenomenal. Dr. Irma, I wanted to tell you, I had just gotten out of graduate school in 1974, and I set up the African American Studies program at Triton College, right outside of Chicago in River Grove. I could teach there, but I couldn't live there. But I did teach Chinua Achebe's A Man of the People, and what is the main Things Fall Apart.
Yes.
And even in 1974, we were talking about the world falling apart for us, and it was because this literature and having that history and that background was not there to look at our resilience and our strength and
Yes.
and the scholars in Timbuktu. I told Al I'm celebrating a 2-year anniversary with him. My first article was August 3rd, and it was on Timbuktu.
Wow.
And it was just great just to have, it was like you were feeling these scholars in the desert.
Yes. Yes.
And writing their things in calligraphy and having the Taliban to want to steal it because it was so powerful. And I'm saying these are our brothers, and our kids need to know that they survived in the desert and they were still scholars.
Yes.
And they discussed with each other who they were. And 28th in Brooklyn and 28th in Indiana, our parents told us who we were.
Yes.
And our teachers, we had phenomenal teachers and a phenomenal principal. I sent Vosh a picture of George Perry. He'll have to show it to you, Al. Unbelievable. But anyway, I would love for them to see that art. Dr.
Well, I pulled it
Beautiful.
up online, so I don't know if how I share screens on this one.
Yeah, there's a button at the bottom of your screen there.
Share. Okay.
Yeah, in the last
Share
window.
screen.
Yeah.
Okay. And let me see.
And Jonathan, in a minute, I want to have you give us a debriefing on Scotland.
I was getting ready to say.
And also,
so this is her website. This is the visual art. It's zenacarlota.com. And these are some of her recent collages that she's done.
I hadn't seen those, Dr. Irma.
Right. And so this is some of her artwork.
Oh, that one.
And I can tell you that this print here and this one I know are available as Gleesy prints because I've given them to people.
At where?
You would have to contact her. I can give you and probably through her email, through her website, there's a contact. This one is called Mamawati. And so this one I have hanging in my home. And this one I have. And this one is from her experience. You know, she taught for about 6 months in Ethiopia at a private school. And so her name is actually Amharic. It means beautiful news. And so people often mistake her. When she was little, people used to stop me in the airport and swear that she was from Ethiopia or Somalia.
Fabulous.
And so these are just some. So this is where you can find it. And she's very influenced. This is influenced by an East Indian art form called Mithila, which a lot of village women do. And what you'll see in Mithila is that her work is highly detailed, and she has her signature is having these borders around her work. She always has these borders. But Mithila, you'll see, like if you look at this piece here on Mamawati, see if I can increase it. I was trying to enlarge it. Is that you'll see that there are like little figure hands in between some of these down here. So it's highly detailed. And what I would say is that all of these were done by hand. This is not computerized art. The collages up here are her beginning to do graphic design on computer and collages, but this art is all hand done.
Beautiful. Well, put her website in the chat.
Absolutely.
So people can reach out to her and perhaps acquire some of her work. I want to come back to you and Brenda to ask you both to reflect on your career as educators, as becoming educators, but also of the warrior spirit that you both possess and reflect. I think it's significant. And Dr. Irma, I always love hearing you tell me stories about people in your life like James Baldwin, heroes of mine. So keep that in mind for a second. We'll come back to that. And you guys think about that conversation.
If Bill Street could talk.
Bill Street. Well, I actually had the pleasure of cooking for James Baldwin. And as you know, many of my photographs of him are actually on the Black Presence at UMass website. They've used that. I have about 51 photos of him, photos of Sonia Sanchez, because I was at the University of Massachusetts, which at that moment in time in 1973 had the second Black chancellor in the entire country and the first Black chancellor in the state of Massachusetts. So Randolph Bromley, whom they've now named the Fine Arts Center afterwards, brought this concentration of people like Chinua Achebe, Max Roach, Archie Shepp, Nelson Stevens, who is one of the founders of Afro Cobra, which was the arts movement. And it was sort of a waylay station because UMass Amherst is part of the 5-college community. So Sonia Sanchez was teaching at Amherst College. You had people like Roberto Marquez, who used to translate Nicholas Guillen's poetry, who was teaching at Hampshire. later Andrew Salkey, who was a Jamaican of Jamaican descent, British writer who used to actually work for the BBC and who would interview people like Langston Hughes and others when they came through the UK. And so he ultimately came to Amherst. So it was quite a constellation and concentration. And if you go to my photographs, Tony Cade Bambara came through there. Alice Walker came through there. We had James Baldwin's 60th birthday party at UMass Amherst. And I have a wonderful image of Maya Angelou sitting in the audience, watching the proceedings. So it was quite a time period to be there.
Did you know Archie Shepp? Did you know Archie Shepp?
I did. I mean, I don't know him. I knew him. Yes, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
He was that figure, Max Roach. When I first had my first child, Antonio, I used to take Antonio to Max Roach concerts and nurse him in the concert. So I guess the love of music was early on. They used to have the Bright Moments Jazz Festival where Billy Taylor used to come and play. And I went to school with Billy Taylor's son. He passed away very early in life, but Dwayne Taylor was one of my classmates. He was part of that 18 that was here. So I got to know Billy Taylor a little bit too, when he would come to campus and visit his son. So it's been that experience. And Al, you may not remember, but I actually wrote a kind of an obituary about Chinua Achebe for Insight News. So it's there. Yep. And I begin by saying this is personal because he was such a gentle soul and such a good spirit. And I would say that if you want to find out about translating things to Yoruba, his son continues to do the work, which was Chinua's vision, which was to create a dictionary of Yoruba, which is the language that is spoken by more people than any other language in the world.
Really?
Yes, it is the largest spoken language because the number of Nigerians is a huge population. And as I understand it, that was part of why he wanted to create a dictionary for it. Wow. And his son.
Even more than Chinese or Indian as well?
I believe, I don't know, because remember in Chinese, you have ethnicities.
Several different languages that
right?
Make up Chinese,
so this is by a single group. And if it's not the largest, it is among the largest spoken language.
And that's the motivation behind trying to innovate with a community newspaper that really can be positioning community as a global experience because of technology, right? So if we are presenting something in Portuguese, in English, in Spanish, in Yoruba, and perhaps in either Swahili or, because it's Minnesota, we could do it in Somali. But if you've done that, you've reached a whole bunch of African people around the planet. That's
yes, you have. And I think there's something to be said. The Caribbean Studies Association is an organization I've belonged to for years, and they've always had their newsletter published, and it is printed in English, translated into Haitian Creole, and also into Spanish, and sometimes into Dutch. And so that is a pattern that whatever is put in there is always in at least the other two languages. And I think you would find with the Association of Black Anthropologists and probably the Association of African Anthropologists that you would find people who might be willing to help with that, to assist with the translation work.
Awesome. Jonathan, talk about Scotland, man.
It was simply amazing. So I was gone for about 11 days. What was really wonderful was getting a chance to head over there, connect. My Scottish clan was going for our annual general meeting, AGM. And so every 3 years we do this in Scotland. It was Clan McFarlane. And so we headed over there. One of the early parts that we had was the Highland Gathering, which was bringing together a group of clans, 6 Highland clans that had formerly been enemies or rivals, and saying, hey, let's all work together and promote our common heritage and have that be something that is great. to come together. So we had that, a group coming together. We had some friendly Highland games, and our clan ended up being the one that won. I'm trying to see if I can, I was going to share a picture, but I may not be able to get over to that because I'm on the stream here. But what was really good was being able to come together. And actually, I got interviewed by the BBC, who was covering both that event and the aspect for Clan Buchanan is installing a chief this year, and that hasn't happened in 300 years.
Wow.
And so it's a lot of big things. But then there was also this black guy in a kilt who they came over and decided to interview me, and I talked about being involved and connected in. It's been, for me, a very enriching experience. I come from an interracial background and honor both sides of my heritage. And one of the fascinating pieces is that the white side of my family actually lives vicariously through me. They get their information about this. I'm the only one who has been back to Scotland. Our family is from a small town called Dunkeld, which I go back to every time I visit. And you would only know it for one of three reasons. Macbeth is set there. It was a religious center of the times for several hundred years because Dunkeld Cathedral, and then Beatrix Potter wrote Peter Rabbit and her other stories on vacation there because she was inspired by the landscape.
Yes.
You sent me some pictures from, was it Scotland or Ireland when you were there?
No, I was in Scotland.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. And I was just writing that my last name is actually Scottish. They believe that the double C, so Mick simply means son of, Lauren means Lawrence. And so when I was talking to someone at one of the castles, she said, depending on the literacy, MCL and MCCL, it depends on what they heard because most people weren't literate enough. Right. So what I did discover, getting into the Scottish archives in Glasgow is like trying to get into security down. And I talked to the guy for about an hour and finally said, oh, just go ahead and you have to leave everything. And so I was able to go there and discovered that there were Scottish farmers who came to North Carolina. And according to my DNA, mine originates in North Carolina, even though my father's from Mississippi. And from there, they spread out. Now, I have encountered North Carolinians, white, whose name is McLaurin, MC capital L. And that's how most people misspell my name. And there is a Laurinburg, North Carolina, and I am convinced that it probably is a derivative of McLaurin, at some point. The other thing that I found was that the Scottish used to send their political prisoners to Barbados. And so when I was traveling with a Barbadian, and we're in a taxi, and this guy is speaking this Scottish brogue, and she says, oh, that sounds just like home. So the patois in Barbados is actually a Scottish brogue. And her name she's part Scottish. And she discovered the village like you did of where the family name came from. So she went on that journey to discover that.
Well, and also a lot of times we pull in, I just put in Clan McLaurin, USA. So that's the society. So each clan has their clan, and then most of them have a society, nonprofit that kind of organizes. And Dr. Irma is exactly right in terms of how the names got spelled, but it goes even further into some will say MAC, some will say MC, some will, like ours is McFarlane. So the way yours is spelled, Al, is the same way my family spelled it. And all that could be is somebody wrote it down the wrong way. Yes. Some of them are Farlin. Some of them are Farlane or Laine. So a lot of times we tell people when they're tracing genealogy, don't get caught up in the spelling. It has to do with where you're from, where your family would have been. And you get a lot of these pieces that then connect in. So I got involved about, we're almost going on, it's been over 15 years that I got involved with the society, started becoming an officer. I'm an officer with the group. And we are what's called an armigerous clan. And that means that we do not have a chief. Our chiefly line died out without an heir. However, one of the projects that I keep trying to pitch Al on, and I'm going to push him now especially, is our chief's brother departed from Scotland and went to Jamaica. And then nobody knows what happened to him after that. And with Al's family being from Jamaica and being McFarlane, I would bet you that there is a connection. And I think there's a great story there, tracing those roots, tracing some of mine, and seeing where all the connections are. So all around, we went up to Loch Ness, which, let me tell you, I always was wondering, how come they just don't take sonar and go out and find this monster? It's got to be easy. I thought Loch Ness was like the size of Bidet Muscat. No. First of all, Loch Ness is 23 miles. Oh. That's just your start. It is fed in by the River Ness, and it empties out into the sea. And then there are underground tunnels that go between that loch and other lochs. So it makes a lot more sense why you can't find Nessie. And
because Nestie's not there, Jonathan.
I think Nessie is there keeping watch on the Scotland.
Come on.
And also, I think what we forget is that some of these divisions between Scotland and Ireland are artificial divisions that came after wars. So I've been told when I was in Scotland that MC capital C is more like an Irish spelling. And so it's probably northern Scotland where they border each other. And so we have to understand that a lot of these countries that we talk about, many of these borders are colonial borders or they're post-war borders. And so they're really artificial. And so people were fluid. They were moving back and forth. You know, it's like Tennessee. You know, you can stand in Tennessee and be in 5 states, right? And so I think we have to remember that as well and not be so rigid, as you were saying about the spelling, but also about the geography, you know?
Very true. And actually, the running joke we have is that Irish and Scots are just cousins who could swim.
Yeah, I love it.
And so you do have families who left Scotland, settled in Ireland, or left Ireland, settled in Scotland, and then, as Dr. Irma said, came over to the United States. A lot of Scots and a lot of Irish came in and settled in the southern United States. And they had the Highland clearances in the mid-1700s is when they went through, and the English basically killed any Scots that they could find. So you see a lot of that happening. Right. I visited Culloden, which was the final battle of the Jacobite uprising, which was an attempt to get Scotland back under the Scottish crown. So you have a lot of pieces of crossover. You even have some levels of similarity between how the Scots and how the Irish were treated and how African Americans were treated. Not to the level of what we've had in terms of slavery, but just in terms of being colonized and being oppressed by another group. So,
Jonathan, stop there for a second. So how do you consider or reconcile the really complicated relationships between Scotch and Irish Americans and Black people out of the South? So many of us in this country have McDaniels, McThis, McThat names. So the Scottish-Irish naming is common and pervasive among African Americans. And the question is, what was the relationship during American slavery with our people and the Scotch and the Irish? One idea is that, we know that the Irish were poor farmers, Scotch hillbillies, and people were all poor together. But there were some who probably were involved in the trade or in the supervising of enslaved people. So how do you study that? Look at it from where you are.
Well, and it's a fascinating topic. And one thing I want to say is it's Scot or Scottish. Scotch is a drink. And so just to be clear, because if you say that in Scotland, they will look at you the wrong way. What is fascinating, and I've been exploring a lot of this already in terms of looking, I think what you see is kind of the same things you're going to see with white populations in the South. You're going to have some that are on the right side, and you're going to have some that are on the wrong side. There's a piece in there. There was a documentary that came out not too long ago that traced kind of the Scottish roots of the Ku Klux Klan, of saying, wait a minute, Klan, there's got to be some connection. And just to sum up, what it found was that when the KKK was first started, the first iteration of it was not a racist organization. It was a social club, and it was to socialize. That then died out. And what restarted from that is what you get with Nathan Bedford Forrest and the White Knights and everything. And you see this transformation into this racist organization. But what you have is some of the elements that tie back into Klan heritage, which is very interesting. First, they're calling themselves the Klan. Second, things like the Burning Cross. There was a thing called the Fury Cross that was used to signal announcements in the Highlands. If the chief's son was born. So there's a lot that I'm working right now to unpack and look at that and see what it is like that where the things changed. Where did white people become white as it was and separate back? There are some who knew about the oppression that they had been through, and so they didn't visit that upon African Americans. Some were part of the Underground Railroad and connected into that. But then there are others who were part of the slave system who would have been overseers. Most that came over were not wealthy. They were very poor and started out as sharecroppers or farmers and those things. So it's a lot to unpack, and I approach it very carefully because I have already found in some Irish roots that go back from my grandmother's side. They used at one point, this person a distant cousin put together a genealogy book in the 70s and 80s, and they used slave tags to connect a father to a son so that they could go ahead and show this is the connection. They didn't have the birth certificates, so instead they used slave tags. And the day I came across that was a very hard day looking at that kind of thing. So it's a lot to unpack, Alan. I'm still, piecing the parts together, but remembering that this is history and pieces that we need to acknowledge and look at and understand fully.
Yeah, I've added a couple of names to Maude Suiter, who is someone who I came across her work, and I've actually used some of quotes from her. She's passed away, but she was of Scottish and Ghanaian descent. And one of the things.
What happened?
I know she was Dr.
She said her battery
was running low.
Yeah.
So that might have been it.
Maybe she's got to recharge it there.
What's interesting is Hallie Quinn Brown actually had Scottish descent. Her grandmother was actually a Scottish woman, had a plantation, and was involved with her grandfather. So there is history there. Looking back as I've used my DNA, my Scottish side is actually part of my largest percentage. It is the largest single percentage in terms of the DNA within me. And when it goes into groups, it becomes even higher. So it is something that I enjoy being connected to. Clan McFarlane is a very open and welcoming clan. I have never had anybody bat an eye. There are some people who still within the Scottish community don't understand what brown people are doing, being a part of that. But there's a lot more of us throughout the states that have become tracing our roots, getting connected, getting our kilts, and showing up at the events and being a part of it.
There are always some.
If I say, do you know who Big Red is? Does that name ring a bell with you?
That does.
I mean, Brenda in particular, though. Brenda, you familiar with the word Big Red?
Just from chewing gum.
Big Red was this cop in Kansas City.
Oh, you told me about him.
Who would pick us up and take us 20 miles or 15
All the
miles
way out.
outside of town and say, okay, you can walk back.
Yep.
And he would basically, didn't happen to me, but it happened to others that I knew about anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Irma's back. Irma, we lost you for a second.
Before we run out of time, just want to tell you they're talking about a third political party. Came up this morning. Yeah,
We got 5 minutes. We got 5 minutes. So we
thought it was rather interesting. And my former students are the ones that pointed it out to me. Boy, they are in tune. They might be a little disappointed that Yusef's not on today because they had a list of questions for the lawyers. But a third party. So that's going to be an interesting political landscape.
Who's talking about that? Who?
Well, it's called the Forward Party, and two of the people that are at the front is Andrew
Asian
Yang
guy,
and what is her name? Christine, the EPA woman. I'm trying to remember her name. Christine Todd Whitman. So the idea behind it is people on both sides who are tired of the animosity and tired of the fighting and have decided to put in for this party. It's been pointed out, third parties don't have the best luck in terms of surviving. Although a lot of that, what's fascinating is you go back into really 18th and 19th century, you start seeing a lot more parties than you do, today. It didn't used to just be two parties. It was, you had the Whigs and you had, this group of Republicans and the separate group of Republicans, the Dixiecrats and all sorts of things. And you see how they change over time. I mean, the Democrats used to be the very racist ones. And the Republicans, Party of Lincoln, were the ones that were actually very supportive of civil rights. Hallie Quinn Brown spoke before the 1924 Republican National Convention. And that was a time when it was right after women got the right to vote. And it was one where she was very active within that party.
But this is different. I think the hearings have spurred them on because they are just totally appalled that this went down and that Trump is still walking around and campaigning. But I think the other thing is that they have a lot of big money. I'm talking billions. So who knows?
The money
and to that extent, there's a new organization. It used to be I think it was the American Heritage Center that funded a lot of work, but there's a new organization that many of Trump followers are going to. And these people are investing a lot of money into podcasts and giving them the technical and professional assistance so that they can get their message out.
Yep,
and
it's serious.
Yes. And we're not seeing the same thing happening on the so-called progressive left or the Democratic Party. They're not supporting, BIPOC, people whose ideas may be somewhat radical. They're not supporting them in the same way. And so there is a whole marketing and I would say communications strategy is taking place. Yes.
It's big. Anyway, I'm sorry.
No, it's a good point. And to Dr. Irma's point, I mean, that's one of the things you saw with the organizing around January 6th is that it was a bunch of the podcasts and a bunch of the small radio shows that were telling the message of Trump to come there for January 6th, that it was going to be the next Civil War. So as the hearings have gone on, they've showed a lot of this and a lot of the stuff that went by everybody on average because we don't listen to that podcast or that radio station. So it's very interesting.
You know, I
Irma,
was telling Al,
in recent
I'm sorry.
weeks, Irma, we've talked about the likelihood or possibility of a civil war. Given this observation, what do the three of you think the future holds? I tend to, I think I said this before, mm, doubt that the society is going to move to open armed internal conflict. But I also say that saying that I could be wrong, real wrong. Irma, what do you think? Brenda, what do you think? Jonathan, what do you think?
I don't think we're there yet.
No.
I believe that the public sentiment, no one wants to see a war happen.
I think somebody does want to see one.
Well, let me put this: is that the
No
general
right-minded person.
population,
A Ted Cruz and a Josh Harlan.
yeah, but these are politicians, you know, who I think their bark is worse than their bite. They bluff a lot, and I'm not saying that there aren't insurgents, that there aren't. Obviously, we've seen what happened in Charleston. We saw what happened in Buffalo. We see the kind of nonchalant with which happened in Texas, where, you know, the white policemen, 200 people, policemen, you know, and Border Patrol people stood by while children were being massacred because it wasn't their children.
Right.
Those children didn't look like them. And so they took their time. So but that is not atypical of what has happened in America. America is just rife with contradiction. And one of the fundamental contradictions is that we don't always practice the democracy that we speak about. But I don't know that we're on the verge of civil war. Is it going to get challenging? Well, we've seen, you know, remember we had lynching, you know, remember that we had segregation. But the thing about this is that we as a people, as Black people, have advanced to the point you can't put that genie back in the box. We're not going to tolerate people treating us as second-class citizens. But I think the trauma that goes along with encountering those kinds of things, I don't think that today's Black parents or parents of mixed race kids who may phenotypically look Black are preparing their children for it. So these children encounter this opposition and they don't have the resilient tools. They don't have an understanding of their own history and how they put their place in that history. People want their children just to be a human being. Well, there's no such animal without culture. Everybody is situated, no matter who they are, where they are in the world. There is no universal individual that is outside of some cultural grounding, some cultural situationness. Right. And so you have to let your children know who they are and where they come from. And not telling them does not make it go away.
Brenda, go ahead. Let's close with you, Jonathan, but Brenda first, go ahead.
No, I think Dr. Irma said everything that I was thinking. I do feel this is different, though. I believe what came out of that last segment of the hearings woke a lot of people up. And that might be the surge for the third party. I don't know. All I know is that those of us who love children are concerned.
Yes.
Because of their future. And your grandchildren, Al, you know, if they didn't have a strong, supportive family, they'd be lost because they're not getting it in that classroom.
That's right.
That's why Adrienne was so important yesterday, Al, with Project Success.
Yes.
That was just great.
Jonathan,
She and
wrap it
Laura
up for
are
us.
doing beautiful work.
I think to Dr. Irma's point, I had the talk with my daughter. I know my friends are still doing that. I agree. There's a lot of people who just want their kids to be human, and we're not there yet. And even just being human means recognizing cultural differences and honoring them versus denigrating them. In terms of civil war, Al, like you, I hope that we're not going to get there, but I worry that I know that there's a segment of our population that wants that. I know that that is something that has been continually pushed by the former president and by his acolytes. And what brings me, I mean, you can go back to the Obama administration when they were saying Obama's going to take your guns, which encouraged all those groups to go out and buy more guns. Mm-hmm. So there was a push to stockpile at that point. We may never get there, but I know that if we do, it is not going to go down the way that group thinks it is.
That's right.
This is a very new day and age. There is a lot more people on the side of right and a lot more people on the side of justice. And there's a lot more Black and brown people who understand and know how to use weaponry if we have to do that, but also know how to take care of their community, to build coalitions. And I think as a whole, as Dr. Irma said, America doesn't want that. And America would be, if it did happen, it would be a short-lived battle that would go right back down as they saw it was not an easy thing to do. Just like with January 6th, all those people who went thought they were in the right and nothing was going to happen. And now as they're ending up in jail, and now as they're ending up on the news, one, they're finding out it's not as easy. And two, they're learning why their grandparents wore hoods.
Listen, out of time. What a great conversation. So good to be with each of you. And we'll see you next time. Irma, next time, let's talk about, you're going to be in town in September.
Yes, September 15th. Yes.
For the 15th anniversary of UROC's Community Day, right?
Yes.
So let's talk about that next week, okay?
That sounds good. That sounds good. And let's connect about that. Okay. Looking forward to it. Take care.
Take care. We'll see you.
Jonathan, I need to get a hold of you.